How to structure a panel discussion. Did you know that there's a difference between structure and format for a panel discussion? Maybe you did, maybe you didn't. I'm Kristen Arnold, and I am a professional panel moderator and a leading authority on moderating panels. It's kind of a tomato-tomato question, because there are 7 tasks, but there's also formats, and they are different. Let's figure out why. In this video, we are going to cover the 7 structural elements that you may or may not choose to use in your panel discussion, as well as many different creative formats that you can use that would liven up the room and liven up your panel format. So let's dive in. Every panel discussion has 7 structural elements. You may do each one of these in the sequence, out of sequence. You can combine them. You may decide not to do one or a few of them. But fundamentally, there are 7 key tasks. The first is there's a welcome. Welcome to my panel. Should be pretty interesting and grabs people's attention. There are the introductions of the topic, the introductions of the panelists, and then there might be a piece where there's initial remarks or a presentation by those panelists. So those are usually considered to be an introductory piece, those 3 elements. There's the welcome, there's the introduction, and then maybe some initial remarks or a presentation. You then move into the next segment, which is the panel moderator curated questions. These are questions that the panel moderator has planned for and is asking the panelists to answer in a conversational way. So there might be the planned questions, and then there are the dig deeper questions that the moderator might elect to do. The next segment is the audience Q&A, where could be scattered throughout the program, or you may decide that you want to have a dedicated audience Q&A section, and then there's the wrap up, the conclusion. So those are the 7 tasks. That's the structure. The how they're strung all together, well, that's the format, and that's where the fun happens. I love looking at different ways of accomplishing the promise that we've made to the audience in the promotional materials, the brilliant panelists that we've selected, and figure out how do we convey that in an engaging way. I mean, audiences don't want to be talked at anymore. They're like the traditional panel formats that basically go down those 7 steps, those 7 structural elements in order. It's like boring. So, audiences don't have high hopes for panels. I mean, let's face it, you could do a traditional format. And if you are in a very traditional, buttoned up kind of culture, maybe you do want to do that. There are 4 traditional styles. So the 4 traditional styles are a main stage style format, where there's a welcome and introduction, there's moderated, curated questions, and then there's a wrap up. Usually it's a very short kind of format. The Q&A style is similar to the main stage style, but you're just adding Q&A to it. So you've got welcome and introduction, you've got some moderator curated questions, then audience Q&A, and then a wrap up. You could have the initial remarks format, where there's a welcome and introduction, and then there are initial remarks. Each panelist gets 2 minutes, 5 minutes, please no more than 5 minutes, to say what they want to say, and then it usually goes to a moderator curated question area, and then maybe some audience Q&A, and then a wrap up. Finally, you have the presentation style, which is honestly my least favorite. So people get a dedicated amount of time, longer than 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, 20 minutes, and presenter, and then maybe audience Q&A, and you're done. And frankly, give them a speaking slot and then call the panel together. Because what are the other panelists doing while that speaker is speaking? Anyway, don't get me started, but it is a very traditional style. So here's a question for you. Did you know all those 7 tasks? You probably did. Good for you. And if you did, I invite you to like this video and subscribe to this channel, because we've got lots and lots of tips And now we're going to go into the fun part, the formatting part. Okay, so one of my favorite formats is riffing a TV show. You got to make sure that the TV show is something that the audience would be familiar with. So for example, I did panel discussion based on the Ellen DeGeneres show. So I wore a white suit like Ellen does. My hair is kind of a crop color. I wore the same kind of sneakers. I used the same kind of format and vibe, and we called it Sellin' with Ellen because it was for a sales group. Now, the sales group was all pretty familiar with Ellen DeGeneres. Now, if I was working with a global sales group, they may or may not have been familiar with her. So you just got to make sure that when you're using a TV format that you think about context. Will the audience understand? You don't want to make them feel like they're outsiders and they're not clued in on the joke, right? So what you do is you just take a look at a talk show format, and it could be afternoon show, morning show, evening show. Just make sure the format everybody is familiar with. Brainstorm all the elements of that show, and then ask yourself, how can we apply it? How can we flip it? There's a lot that you go, oh, that'd be fun, but you don't have enough time, you don't have enough energy, you don't have enough pull to do that. There's probably a couple of things that you could do, and then your title should weave that in, like Sellin' with Ellen. It was so much fun. Another format that you can springboard off of is the event theme or maybe the location. If the location is in Hawaii, well, then have Hawaiian themed ideas. Maybe have all the panelists wear Hawaiian shirts. Maybe, riff using Hawaiian words or, analogies and things like that. Most meeting organizers, they're good with that as just a way to liven it up. Another format is a room set format. Now, a room set, you can have the panelists sit at the front like a traditional format. You could also have them what we call a panel in the round, where you put the panel in the middle of the room, you have the panelists, and the audience is around the panelists. Now, if you've got a big AV budget, you can actually make the stage turn very, very slowly because somebody's going to be seeing the back of a panelist. That is another way of doing a room set panel. But imagine this, that you actually played something like musical chairs in that format and allow the audience to come up and participate. Or maybe you have just one empty seat that you allow the panelists to stay in that panel in the round, but that empty seat changes. You could even do that without being in a panel in a round where you have the empty seat or the musical chairs. But think about the room set, and does it have to be the way that you think it is? I actually had one client who had the panelists in each of the four corners. It was a small room, but they each represented a different piece of what we were talking about. So think about some ways that you can use the room set to support your panel format. So you can also do an audience-driven panel format where the audience drives what goes on. And I like to use technology for this. I like to use an app called Slido, and it can either be web-based or on your phone. And people can submit questions, and they like the questions that they want to discuss. So as a panel moderator, it actually makes my job a lot easier that I start at the top. Or maybe I'll start close to the top and let the audience know that I'm going to save this question for after this question because it just makes more sense once we've answered this question. Those are audience-driven formats. Another format you could do without using technology is just have people talk in their tables, if they're seated in rounds, or turn to their neighbor and say, so what's the most pressing question that you have? And then grab those questions either on index cards or have one representative from each group stand up and ask the question. Those actually don't take as much preparation for the panel moderator, but the audience feels more in control. But here's the deal, you're in less control. So you have to balance your own needs for being in control or out of control. Not out of control, but just less control. So those are audience formats. Finally, my favorite is segment-driven activities. So what I think about is that audiences get bored within about 6 to 10 minutes. Why? Because they're used to commercial breaks. So you got to change it up, shift gears about every 6 to 10 minutes. So when I'm thinking about the panel formats, I think, okay, here's my opening. It needs to be nice, short, and crisp. Here's how I'm going to introduce the panelists. And then we're going to start with something really interesting. I love the newlywed game, which is, and I'm dating myself. Anybody remember the newlywed game? If you remember the newlywed game, shout out, put it in the comments. I don't know. The newlywed game, everybody gets a foam board and they write the one word, the biggest challenge facing the industry. You have the audience talk about the biggest challenge facing the industry as the panelists are writing on this board. And then you solicit a couple of ideas from the audience. Then on a count of 3, the audience shows us what they wrote on the board at the same time. And everybody's like, ooh, oh my gosh, it's awesome. It really sets the tone of this is going to be engaging. This is going to be awesome. You want to be part of this conversation. So just keep in mind, for every segment, you want to do something at the beginning of each segment. It could be just show a small video segment, or it could be true or false, or clap if you agree, or something, a poll of the audience, something that grabs the audience's attention and makes them lean forward. In fact, I wrote a book called 123 Ways to Add Pizzazz to a Panel Discussion that has a whole bunch of ways that you can start each segment. We've just covered structure and formats. If you're interested in learning more, you can go to the 7-part free video series that you can find at howtomoderateapanel.com. Thanks for watching.